I am pleased to welcome our next speaker, Jason Bloomberg, the president of Intellyx and leading industry analyst on agile digital transformation. Jason is a regular contributor to Forbes magazine with over 750 published articles and has given talks at more than 350 conferences, webinars, and other events. He speaks on how today's disruptive enterprise technology trends support the digital business professionals' transformation goals. Let's give Jason a warm welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here at the first Kintone Connect in the United States. So today I'll be talking about making sense of the low-code, no-code revolution. Osamo actually used both terms, low-code and no-code. This poster over here says no-code, and so it's like, well, what's going on here? It's a bit confusing already, and we've only just begun, so we'll help sort of straighten this out. So a bit about me is, as she said, I'm president of Intellyx, an analyst firm focused on agile digital transformation. My latest book is called The Agile Architecture Revolution. We also publish the Agile Digital Transformation Roadmap poster, and if you're in my afternoon workshop, you'll get a copy. So if you're not, I brought a few extras, but hopefully you'll just show up for the workshop. Okay, so what's the historic context for this low-code, no-code story? Well, this isn't really new, right? There is a history to this whole trend, and it goes back to a number of familiar acronyms. There's CASE, Computer-Aided Software Engineering. CASE tools were very popular in the 60s and 70s. Essentially, these were tools that generated code, so you would tell the tool what you wanted your application to do. It would generate some code, and the code sucked, and you had to go in and fix it, and it wasn't particularly useful. But it was pretty good for the 60s, right? It was a good effort. Then we had 4GLs, the fourth generation languages. So the 3GLs were compiled languages like COBOL and Fortran. The 4GLs like PowerBuilder and Delphi came along, and they gave you a visual environment. They give you an IDE, an integrated development environment, which are now quite familiar, but this was really the advent of those kinds of tools. And it simplified development and made it easier for enterprise teams to build applications, but it was still code-oriented. You were still essentially writing code. It was just within a richer tooling environment. So it was a step in the right direction, but definitely not what we're talking about today. And then there's the trend of rapid application development, or RAD. And RAD is really more of an approach than a tool set, right? It's not, the other tool are more about tools. RAD is tool supported, but they're really organizational principles for building applications more quickly. And RAD was very popular in the 1990s, and a lot of the principles of RAD have now fed into agile approaches, which really got rolling in the 2000s, as well as DevOps in the 2010s. So RAD is all part of the history, and obviously we still want to build applications rapidly, so rapid application development, generically speaking, is still something we all want. But we don't call it RAD anymore generally because RAD is a 1990s term, but we're still doing the same basic things. We've just gotten a lot better at them. So what is different now, right? If you see skeptics online talking about low-code and no-code, they'll say, well, this is just case tools and RAD, 4GL. Nothing has changed. Well, actually, a lot has changed. It's not just a progression of maturity of the tooling, which obviously continues to move forward, but we also have some fundamental differences in the modern technology environment. Obviously, the cloud is here, right? So we have cloud computing. We have the ability to leverage the cloud, but we also have the cloud mindset, right? We expect horizontal scalability. We expect automatic resilience. We expect the ability to just architect for massive scale. So that's something now that is part of our context when we build applications. We don't think of an application as just a piece of code running on one computer, which is pretty much what we were thinking in the 1980s. We'd get out our 4GL tool and we'd build our application, and it might be a fat client on client server, but it was still essentially running on one place. But the cloud obviously gives us this broader context of scalability. Then we also have RESTful APIs, so the ability to integrate in a lightweight, seamless, user-friendly or developer-friendly way This is also something that's very different from the 80s and 90s, where integration was difficult or impossible. We weren't building applications with the idea of having programmable interfaces. Well, today, it's lightweight, it's HTTP-based, so it's ubiquitous, and every developer knows how to work with REST at this point. So that gives us also the context that when we build software, it's essentially designed to talk to other pieces of software. And that's just something that we come to expect from the software we're building today. And then if you look at the modern trends, containers and microservices still maturing. They're not fully baked yet, but it's obviously the direction we're going. And essentially what we're doing with containers and microservices is we're continuing the pattern of modularity of code that we've really been working on since the 1980s and 1990s, right? In the early days where we were building on mainframes in the 60s and 70s, we had massive monolithic applications. Along came object-oriented programming with the notion of modularity. We had objects in the context of C++ and Java, and that gave us modularity, which gave us flexibility and enabled us to distribute the development work to different people, and there were a number of advantages there. Well, we continue that pattern. Now we have containers and microservices where the modules, the actual microservices, can be that much smaller. They're in the cloud context, they have RESTful interfaces, so this is all part of the same story. And this gives us a whole approach to building fluid applications at scale that we can build on a continuous basis, responding to ongoing changing customer demands in a way we really never could, even with object-oriented programming. So yes, we're building on lessons of the past. All the principles of object-oriented programming are still with us. The principles of rapid application development are still with us. But we still have a new world that is cloud-based and with RESTful interfaces and in this broader context. Okay, so within this context, we have the rise of this notion of both low-code and no-code. And by the end of my talk, you'll have a clear idea what the difference is and how they relate. And it's sort of more subtle than simply whether or not we have a little bit of code versus not having code. There's really more to it than that, and we'll tease that out. So the core of the notion of low-code is that we have declarative, model-driven platforms for building better software. So declarative essentially means that we don't have to write code per se. Instead, we describe the behavior that we want, often in a visual environment or through some sort of descriptive language. And then the underlying technology, the tooling, is able to interpret our description in order to create the functionality of the application. And then model-driven also ties to this notion of a visual representation, where it may be visual or it may be a more abstract than that, but we're essentially representing the capabilities in the context of how the tool thinks of the application, and then that drives the actual functionality. So instead of having to work with lines of code, we're now working in a visual context where we're dragging and dropping and we're configuring as opposed to coding lines of code. So low code, though, is different from no code in the context of the actual user. So with the no code context, we're talking about business users, not professional developers, as a rule, who can now leverage some sort of tooling environment to build a certain range of applications. So, and this now is going to be a question, right? We have low code aimed at professional developers simplifying their lives, and we have no code aimed at business users, empowering them to build applications where before they may not have been able to. They would have had to talk to IT and talk to the development team in order to build applications, and now they can do it on their own. Either way, you still have certain requirements, right? You can't simply say, well, no code cuts IT out of the equation, where IT is too expensive or too difficult to work with or too slow, so we're going to do it all on our own. That doesn't work. That's called shadow IT, and that doesn't really meet business needs because we still have issues of integration, security, and compliance. Right? IT is still responsible for keeping track of all of your existing technology assets, your systems of record, your core databases, your core transaction systems, right? And they still have to keep track of those and make those available for applications across the business. And of course, security and compliance, the last thing we want to do is bypass those, right? Those are mandatory. We can't not have security and compliance. But if you're a business user and you're building an application, you don't want to have to worry about whether or not that application is properly secured or compliant, right? Those are hard problems to solve, and they have to be solved across the organization, not on an application-by-application basis. So that's still a reason to work with IT, even if you're a business user using a no-code platform to build a business application. So if you think about the role professional developers have, well, on the one hand, yes, they're writing code. But in the broader context, they do a lot more than that because they're working within the context of the enterprise information technology architecture, which has to be properly secure, properly compliant, and everything has to work with everything else. Right? We're in this modular world where applications talk to other applications. Everything is accessing existing data stores, existing systems of record. So a professional developer has that broader context. It's not just about coding this app and coding that app. Okay, so when we say no code, well, it might sound like we're really talking about not having to code, but because that's sort of the phrase we have. But that's not really the focus, right? The focus is on building better apps faster. So it's essentially taking the rapid application development principles of the 90s and moving them forward. So next generation options where coding is now optional but not necessary, you can still build true enterprise-class applications in a low-code environment. So the key here is that we want to give our organizations the ability to build better software for a strategic advantage. So instead of just software being something that you need to have, everybody needs to have customer relationship management. Everybody has to have ERP. Everybody has to have transaction processing. So these are all checkbox technologies that everybody needs to have depending upon your industry. Well, we also want software to give us strategic advantage, to give our organizations the ability to compete better in whatever business we're in, do something our competition cannot do, or do something better than the competition in order to improve the business, right? Gain market share, keep customers happy. So this is really the goal of low-code, is to help that application development team build more strategic software more quickly, and the speed is essential because speed is necessary to remain competitive. Okay, so in terms of low-code now, if you think about what's going on here, so we're helping our professional developers, so we're helping people in the technology organization build better software faster, and we're also taking away a lot of the tasks that they would rather not do anyway. So in the broader context of enterprise development, a lot of the time is spent worrying about security and worrying about compliance and worrying about issues of responsive user interfaces, or worrying about integrating with various systems and data formats and all of this sort of mumbo jumbo that takes up most of the time for a professional developer. So what we're doing here is we're saying, well, wait a minute, our low-code platform can take all that off your plate, empowering that developer to be more effective. So to work with the business to build business value, as opposed to spending all the time on the plumbing that that's been bogging down their careers. So it's a way of improving the user centricity of the software, because we're taking a lot of the grunt work off their plates. So it's not about putting the developers out of work. And this is a common misconception that, oh, well, if we have a platform that will write the software for us, we don't need people who know how to write software anymore. They'll all be out of work. It doesn't work that way, right? Because we don't have enough of these people anyway, so we would rather give them more important work because, one, it's going to be more value to our organization and to our customers. Two, they'll like their jobs better, so they're likely to stick around longer, right? Because they're doing more important, more interesting work. So that's one of the key value propositions of low-code, is that it gives the people who are building applications a more fun job that provides more value. Right, so that and so everybody wins, right? So they win, their organization wins, and the customer wins, and so that's obviously great to have that kind of win-win situation. Okay, so that's sort of the low-code story aimed primarily at the professional developer. But the no-code story aimed at the business user is part of this broader trend towards self-service IT, which is we also call the democratization of technology. Osamu mentioned democratization. Well, that's a term we use as well, where we have the rise of this notion of a citizen participant, this citizen terminology. So it could be a citizen developer, which is a business user building applications, or a citizen integrator, integrating applications, a citizen data analyst, right? So you have the role of a data analyst, which could be very technical, somebody who knows how to program and use some very sophisticated tools. But data analysis is really a business function, right? So we have this rise of citizen data analysts who don't have to know all the ins and outs of technical tooling and can focus on the value of the data. And the story goes on and on. The citizen role is part of this broader trend toward the consumerization and democratization of technology across the organization. So what's the role of IT in this vision? Well, we don't want to fall into the shadow IT trap. Right? Shadow IT is where IT is too slow or too expensive or too hard to work with, so the lines of business, the various divisions, work around IT to get the applications that they want. The problem with shadow IT, there's a number of problems, right? You end up with redundancy, right? 12 different ERP systems because nobody wants to use the same one IT supports. Or you have problems of security and compliance, right? There's nobody keeping track of all of the rules and all of the best practices. So it's important, even in this context of self-service IT, that IT plays an important role. Security, compliance, and access to those systems of record. So we have this broader notion of the App Store model of IT services. So if you think about how consumers access applications these days, they just get out their phone, they might download an app, there's a button, there's an icon, they click on the app. Well, we're bringing that usability, user centricity, and mobile centricity to the enterprise, to every organization, where now anybody in your company, whether it's somebody in HR, somebody in marketing, somebody in technology, whoever they happen to be, they want access to an app, they pull out their phone and click a button. Or if they want, they can use their computer. It should work pretty much the same, but it should be as simple as that, for regardless of what you're doing, whether it's data entry or whether it's the call center rep talking to a customer who calls in, whatever the role is, to access that technology, it's as simple as clicking an app on your phone. Okay, so this no-code story then supports the role of the citizen. So we have this self-service application assembly. So you're building applications, but you're not coding applications. So that's why I use the word assembly instead of coding. So citizen developers can now can use a tool like Kintone to build very powerful applications. And just how powerful they can be is a moving target. Right? So if you look at all of the no-code players in this space, some you can build very simple rudimentary applications. Others you can build more powerful applications. And every vendor is sort of moving around, improving their platform so you can build increasingly powerful applications. So whether or not you're called upon to write any code, well, you'd say, this is no code. It's for a business user. There shouldn't be any code. Well, sometimes it's still optional. Because business users, it's not like a business user is necessarily, they see a little JavaScript and they faint. No, come on, a little bit of JavaScript. I mean, not every business user is comfortable with that level of coding, but it's not that advanced, right? There's not a black and white, can you code, can you not code, right? Obviously, hardcore Java development is best left to the professionals, but writing a little bit of JavaScript to do some sort of basic thing, that's something that a lot of people who might call themselves business users might be capable of. But we don't want to require that, right? We want to make that an option. So here we have this low code, which is really about empowering developers, not about reducing the amount of code necessarily. We have no code, which has a little asterisk. No code, except of course if you want to do a little bit of coding, and that's fine. But does that make it low code? Well, it's sort of it's a terminology challenge, and this is just part of the state of the market, is that no-code might allow for some coding. You can be in a low-code space without having to do any coding. So what is really the difference? The difference is primarily the sorts of people who are using the technology. And some of the platforms are both, right? There's not necessarily clear that no-code is over here and low-code is over there, and they're different, right? There's a lot of overlap as well, which just makes the market that much more confusing. So generally speaking, though, the sorts of apps that no-code application platforms are good for have relatively limited scope. So they can be aimed at project management apps or simple data entry apps or other things, but that's not necessarily the case, right? Some of these platforms are better at business process-related apps. Some are better at data entry apps. Some are better at mobile capabilities, so they're able to access capabilities on the phones. So it really varies across the market. Okay, so hopefully I helped clear up the difference between low-code and no-code, but it's not, it's just essentially confusing, right? Because there's no black and white distinction between the two. So you might talk to the big analyst firms, and you'd think they would clear this up for you. Well, not really. The big analyst firms, Gartner and Forrester in particular, struggle with these distinctions because it's a moving target. These are emerging markets. There's a lot of shifting around, and there's overlap, right, between low-code and no-code. So Forrester, well, they divide between low-code and mobile low-code development, and they're starting to think about a wave focusing on citizen development. That's a new thing for them. Well, low-code versus mobile low-code is really not where you want to draw the line, because most of these tools support mobile applications. They may focus on that or maybe one of the options, but it's not like it's black and white. It's not like you go shopping for a low-code platform that does not have mobile support. That's not something people actually are looking for. So, and they don't really talk about no-code, although now they have this notion of citizen, but it's still, if you talk to Forrester, they're still quite confused about this. So Gartner, well, they have an existing category of application platform as a service, or APaaS. So this is a cloud-based platform for building applications. And then along came this low-code, no-code story, and they say, wait a minute, this is something a little bit different. So they came up with high-productivity application platform as a service, or HPAPAAS. How would you pronounce that? HPAPAS? I don't know. Which makes you wonder, well, if there's this high productivity application platform as a service, who would want the low productivity application? Who would want low productivity anything? It's like, well, I don't like productivity. Give me something low productivity. I want a lot of busy work, please. Can I give you my money for that? No, nobody wants low productivity. So it's a bit of an odd choice of terminology. And it would also suggest, because of the PaaS part of it, the app as a service, that it has to be in the cloud. Now, most of these platforms run in the cloud, right? Why wouldn't you? But there's not necessarily a clear reason why that should be the only choice, right? Some applications run on premises, run on laptops, et cetera. Some run in the cloud, where you access them on a computer or on a phone. Some run on the phone. Right? So it really depends upon what kind of application you're building. So there shouldn't be a requirement. It has to be in the cloud, right? You want to be flexible with regard to whether or not the platform or the applications you can build are in the cloud or on premises, on the phone, wherever you want to put them. Okay. So another key challenge, as I mentioned, is governance and security. So no-code, where the business users are building the applications, shifts that burden to IT, because we don't want to expect, a data analyst or a business analyst or a process specialist to have to figure out all the ins and outs of security and compliance, right? Building, say, a PCI compliant application that processes credit cards. There's a lot of subtleties to how to get that right. And it's not obvious, right? Because it's a set of regulations and there's established best practices for complying, but it requires a specialized skill set to know how to do that. Of course, HIPAA in healthcare, same thing. There are global regulations now, GDPD out of Europe, PSD2 for payment processing in Europe. These have a number of different requirements, and it's complicated and difficult to ensure your organization is fully compliant. So the last thing you want to do is not take care of those things. So if you're in a no-code environment, you want an IT organization backing you up. So this has been a problem in the past, right? This pattern of having business users create their own applications without talking to IT has been a problem already, right? So if you remember Microsoft Access, this was the classic example, right? It just comes with your Microsoft Office package. Now anybody can go in and create an application and share it with your buddies. It's running on your computer under your desk, and there's no security, there's no compliance. Is it collecting confidential information? Who knows, right? It's not on any inventory anywhere. It can open up a lot of risks. I like picking on Microsoft Access, but you could do that same thing with Lotus Notes, if you remember. Wasn't too hard for a business user to go into Lotus Notes and create their own application and share it with people and say, okay, well now what, right? Who's keeping track of this? And there were a number of them. FileMaker from Apple, you could do the same thing. So there were a number of these kind of, the earlier generation no-code platforms that were really had this shadow IT problem. So part of the challenge then is, well, how do we empower business users while still facilitating IT to keep track of these things? So what we really want to do is we want to abstract governance and security. Right, instead of having, we write our business application and then we call the security guy, can you check this for me? And that's the last thing you want to do, right? Because they'll yell at you, right? You recall that side of the security guy, because they're way too busy. They don't want to hear from you, and now you're asking them to check this app you built. It's like, what the hell is that? You don't want to be there, right? So how do you resolve this, right? Well, you want to essentially shift governance and security to the left. And by to the left, we mean earlier in the life cycle. So you don't want to build the app and then call the security guy at the end. It's like, well, is this okay? Can I publish this? No, you want to have that part of the original context for the application. So this is what a lot of these modern low-code, no-code platforms help with. They essentially enforce security and compliance ahead of time. So the business user can go in and say, well, I want to build this app, and if you try, say, exposing confidential information, it just won't let you, right? And so it's built in, and IT has configured it so that it's following the rules that your organization has decided it wants to follow. So this is essential for both low-code and no-code. And in the low-code space, where the professional developers are building applications, well, they don't want to have to worry about coding, compliance, and security either. So they would rather have a situation where if they're writing some code, that they cannot publish it unless it complies with the security guidelines. And that's difficult to do, but that's what a lot of these low-code platforms are doing today. Okay. So earlier in my talk, I talked about declarative and model-driven. So just talk a little bit more about what we mean by that. So what we really want to do with both the low-code and no-code side is essentially shift the application functionality to these abstract declarative models. So you can think of what you really end up with. Well, typically you end up with some sort of declarative description of the application. And it could be in a language like JSON, a JavaScript object notation. But that's behind the scenes, right? It's there if you want to look at it. You can poke around if you want. But for most users, they're seeing that visual model, some visual representation of the application. You can double click on it. You can configure the data format. You can, if you're doing integration, connecting A to B, you drag and drop the connections. And that's essentially what we mean by declarative and model-driven. So this gives us greater agility, right? The ability to make changes on an ongoing basis, because we don't have these long life cycles for applications where we have to compile the code and go through all this testing, right? We can do this on an ongoing basis, make an adjustment. The testing is very lightweight, very quick, and it gives us much greater flexibility to meet changing business needs. And it gives us greater velocity as well, right? We're able to respond to changes, respond to changing demands very quickly. So the goal here is to represent the application in the model and let the model drive the functionality. That is, we don't want to have to build our model and then have some developer go in and monkey with the code because the model doesn't work. Right? That was the problem with case tools. Yes, we could build this model, we could generate all the code, but it didn't work properly. So we have to go in and fix all the code every single time. And that just did not provide that much value. So today, we don't want to monkey with whatever that JSON representation of the model is. We probably don't even want to look at it. I mean, it's there if we need to, but we don't want to monkey with it. We don't want to look at it. We want the model to represent all of the functionality. So if you want to change the app, you change the model. And then you automatically redeploy, and it becomes a very lightweight life cycle. You change the app, change the model, redeploy, and rinse and repeat. Okay, so this low-code, no-code story is part of a broader story of what we like to call software-defined everything, or SDX. And this phrase software-defined crops up in a lot of areas. We have software-defined networking, where instead of going into every router and configuring the rules manually, we have this declarative representation, right? Some sort of model that represents how our network is configured, and we push a button and it configures our network. We want to make a change, we change the model and redeploy. So you see this pattern, right? The software-driven pattern. We don't go into the physical technology. We make all changes in the model. We have a visual representation of the model, and if we want to change something, we change the model and redeploy. That's the software-defined pattern. So we have software-defined networking. We have software-defined data centers. Well, a data center is big and complicated, so this is a work in progress. But the idea is, instead of having to go into your data center, you have racks and racks of servers, and you have to have some techie go in and move things around. You don't even want to go in that room, right? You do it all within this model, this visual representation of your entire data center. You want to make a change, you change the model. You don't go in and change the physical servers. So if you think in terms of your data center as physical servers, you might say, well, how's that work? Well, but if you think of it as virtual servers, well, then it becomes a little clearer. And that's what we have these days, where we have virtual servers. We have, whether it's VMware in our own data center, or we're leveraging the cloud, right? We don't even worry about the physical hardware anymore. We're an entirely software-driven world, where virtualization is also part of this software-driven trend. So all of this is part of this trend. Now, this is the first time I have the word DevOps on the slide. So DevOps is also part of this trend. So DevOps is essentially a cultural change that instead of separating development and operations into different groups, we're basically saying, well, let's have everybody work together. Let's do everything we can to automate operations so that we can represent the deployment configuration for any software as a declarative model. You see the pattern, keeps coming up. So we have this declarative model, some visual representation of how we want all of our applications to be deployed, even in a complex environment where we have some on premises, some on cloud, multiple pieces, all the different moving parts. We still represent all of that in a model. And who creates the model? Well, this DevOps engineer who has development skills, because you have to know how to create the model, but also has the operational context. And you're now working essentially to deploy the entire software application dynamically in an automated way. So DevOps is focused on hand coding as a rule, but if you think about it, this low-code, no-code story is really the same story. We don't want, instead of manually deploying software, we want to do everything in the model. So it's all part of this broader software-defined trend. So this is a key point, right? DevOps versus low-code in particular. So we're talking about professional developers, although it could be no-code as well. But DevOps is a cultural change to build better software quicker. Low-code is a cultural and technology change to build better software quicker. So they're aligned, they have the same goals. But DevOps emphasizes hand coding, where low-code replaces hand coding. It allows for it, obviously that's the low part, but you want to do as little of it as possible. So we have the same goal and different approaches. But in reality, they're all in alignment, right? Because it's not about whether or not you're hand coding, it's about whether or not you're delivering business value faster and in a more flexible way. So if you remember that DevOps is not about coding, it's about a cultural change that provides better software faster, then DevOps and low-code or low-code, no-code combined are really all part of this same story, where it's partly about technology, partly about representing applications in a model-driven, declarative way, but it's also partly about a cultural change, where instead of having a bunch of different teams and handing off from one to the next, here's security, here's development, here's QA, here's operations, and every handoff is now slows you down and causes issues. Well, let's put them all into one group. Let's build the applications in a low-code, no-code way, push a button to deploy, need to make a change the model, redeploy, and that is both DevOps and low-code, no-code combined into the same movement. So this is part of what we call the digital enterprise. This is essential for digital transformation. You want to support your end customer better, you need to have end-to-end organization from your customer and customer-facing technology all the way to your systems of record, those databases, those enterprise apps. All of that has to be part of this low-code, no-code, model-driven, declarative way of thinking of the world. So some people think of that as DevOps. Some people think of it as low-code, no-code. Really different approaches to the same basic story for what it means to do technology right in the 2010s. So in this context of DevOps across organizations, what is the role of this low-code, no-code platform? Well, we want software that responds to changing requirements, right? So we want software that is inherently flexible. Now this raises the bar on what we want from software, right? In the past, if we want software that does something, we come up with requirements for it, and then we either build it, or if we're lucky, we can go buy something that does what we want. And that's sort of the general pattern, right? Have requirements, build or buy software that meets the requirements, and then you're done. Except you're not done, because business changes, requirements change, everything evolves, so you have to go back and do it again. Very expensive, time-consuming, risky, right? So what if we had software that instead of just doing what we wanted it to do today, gave us the ability to build and change software on an ongoing basis? So as requirements changed, we keep the platform, we continue to update and evolve the applications on the platform. So this is a whole new way of thinking about how organizations leverage and purchase and use software. It's not just coming up with the requirements and building or buying to the requirements. It's saying, well, let's get the right platform so that it doesn't matter that requirements are always changing. We have built into our culture a way of building capabilities that our business needs quickly and efficiently, lowering our risk. That's all I talk about, compliance and security, and doing it in a way that hopefully will beat the competition, right? Give us greater competitive advantage. Okay, now is this all wonderful? It sounds great. It's like, wow, this is what I need. Well, but there's pushback. Not everybody is too keen on this. So, and this is an interesting part of the story. And this is true really for any truly disruptive movement. People don't like disruption, because disruption can threaten different people. And it's true with low-code, no-code. So this is something to watch out for. So who is threatened by this vision of low-code, no-code, very rapid, lightweight, easy-to-build applications that meet ongoing business needs? It sounds like, well, everybody should sign up for that, right? Well, consultants don't like it, because consultants want to build more hours. And if you tell them, well, we used to do this hand-coded in Java, and we needed 5,000 hours. Now we're using Kintone, and it'll take 20. Well, those consultants, they're not going to get their bonuses. I mean, they're upset. So consultants are pushing back, right? And the consulting organizations are saying, wait a minute, this can threaten all of these throngs of Java developers and other kinds of developers that we have. IT departments are often threatened by low-code, no-code, because they've been telling the bosses, oh, this application, it's going to take $10 million in 6 to 9 months, and it's going to involve all this stuff. And now somebody comes along and says, wait a minute, it's going to cost a fraction of that, and it's only going to take a few weeks, and it's going to be better as a result. Well, it makes IT look bad, right? Because they've been sort of towing the wrong line for a while. You know, the 1990s, 2000s story of big, expensive, complex, difficult projects. And now, hey, wait a minute, they don't have to be that way. Well, IT can push back. And you would think, well, wait a minute, don't they have the best interests of the business in mind? Some of them do, and they can come around, and this can be often the challenge. How do you bring around an organization that is resistant to an obviously better approach to building and changing applications? And what about the DevOps teams? Well, remember, the difference between DevOps and low-code, no-code is that DevOps focuses on hand coding, while low-code in particular replaces hand coding. The problem is coders love to code, right? That's why they got into it. It's fun. It's a great career. I did it for a few years. It's a blast. But so you come along and say, wait a minute, we don't need all that coding anymore. It's like, hold on, why do you need me then? Well, it really depends upon the nature of the developer, right? There are people who are in these organizations and all they want to do is code. They have their blinders on. It's just give me a Java to write. I just want to write Java all day, every day, or whatever their language of choice is. And, but those people are increasingly less valuable to their organizations. The software professionals that continue to be valuable are the ones that say, wait a minute, it's not about the code, it's about the customer, it's about the business value, it's about connecting the dots. There's coding, there's cloud computing, there's big data, there's all of these things that we can leverage to bring value to our organization and bring value to our customers. How can I, as a professional, help with that? Those are the people you want to hire and motivate anyway. Right? That poor fellow who just wants to write Java and nothing else, doesn't want to think about this greater world of business value, they're not particularly good developers because they're not focusing on the right things. So there's some organizational challenges, there's some management challenges, but the writing's on the wall, right? This low-code, no-code movement is just a better way to build and modify, build and update software that meets customer needs. So competitive differentiation hangs in the balance, right? Whether or not you can leverage software not just to do all the stuff that everybody has to do, right? All of the sort of record keeping and transaction things, every company in your space does the same thing, but it's the competitive stuff, right? What are you doing that is different and better than your competition? That's the key here, right? Because everybody else is doing all the basics. That's not your differentiation. But more and more companies in any industry are leveraging software for the competitive differentiation. You need to be fast, you need to be efficient, you need to focus on customer needs, and of course you need to make sure compliance and security are taken care of and not slowing you down. And those are all parts of this low-code, no-code story. Okay, so this has not always been the case. And I don't know if you remember, in 2003, I think half of you weren't even born yet. I don't know, it's hard to tell. But in 2003, this professor, I think he was, a writer for Harvard Business Review, wrote this, called Nick Carr, and he wrote this controversial paper for Harvard Business Review called IT Doesn't Matter. And it created this big stir, especially with CIOs, who said, wait a minute, what's about my job? It's important, of course it matters. But what his point was, is at that point, in 2003, well, software was really focused on the keeping the lights on stuff, right? Everybody had a ERP, so nobody's ERP gave them any advantage over anybody else's ERP. And then go through the list of all this technology they had. Because we had been through the dot-com crash, so we'd done all the dot-com stuff, we built all our websites, all the sort of nonsense went away when the dot-com crash happened, and all we were left with was just software that kept the lights on. IT was a cost center, and the role of the CIO was reducing costs. And it's like, well, is that it? Is that the whole story? Are we stuck with that forever? Well, what's changed is now, in the digital transformation era, the digital era we're in now, software is the key to competitive differentiation across industries, across the world, right? It's not just better products or whatever it is, unless your products are software-based, and often the differentiation, even in your products, are based on the software in the products, right? So software becomes the key differentiation. How do you get this right? Well, you can't think in terms of 2003 IT, where you're just keeping the lights on and IT is a cost center. You have to think in terms of this new vision of software as a competitive differentiator, right? And how do you do that? Well, enterprises, no matter the size, whether you're a smaller organization or larger organization, you have to build better software faster. That's the DevOps story, and that's the low-code, no-code story. Okay, so what happens to your organization? Well, fundamentally, change becomes a core competency in your organization. So what is your core competency? Well, every organization does something really well, and that's your core competency, right? Whatever makes you special and different as an organization. What's happening now is that the ability to deal with change itself is becoming what makes you special and different as an organization. So both responding to change, adverse change, change in the environment, competitive pressures, changing customer demands, but also intentional change. Intentionally disrupting the market, bringing out new products and services that send your competitors scrambling, right? That's what you're really trying to achieve here. So change is becoming a core competency, and the organizations that have risen to the top of the Fortune 500 are the ones that are getting this right. You don't see, General Motors and Exxon up there anymore. Who's up there? Apple and Microsoft and Facebook, right? These are companies that live and breathe change as a core competency. So what do you need? Well, customer focus. Right? It's not about siloed organizations where each silo keeps track of one thing and only one silo is responsible for the customer. No, it's about everybody. You break down those silos, everybody's responsible for the customer. You need an agile organization, right? An organization that is fundamentally has a culture of dealing with change. And of course, rapid, iterative, stakeholder-focused application development, because the software is the core enabler of this whole vision. And where does rubber hit the road with software? It's the applications, in particular the ones you put in front of customers. All right, well, so that's it for my talk. There's my contact information. If you want a copy of our poster and you're not in my workshop, you can go to agiledigitaltransformation.com and download a PDF. And it looks like we have about 5 minutes, if there's any questions. Any questions?
Hello there. Great job, Jason. Thank
you very much.
We had some questions come in through the app, so just a reminder, go into the app, just click on the conference schedule, low-code, no-code revolution session. You can still enter in your questions. Here were the first few to come through. Which industries are embracing low-code first?
Well, you might think that would be the usual suspects, financial services and retail, but in reality, it's across the board. And we're seeing it in any number of industries, because this whole digital transformation is affecting every industry, and often in different ways. But for instance, we're seeing enormous disruption in the utilities industry. Traditionally a very conservative, slow-to-change industry. Not anymore, right? With smart grids and consumer-generated power, and all the threats of terrorism attacks and all these issues, right? Enormously disruptive. Or I mentioned retail. Retail is perhaps the leader in digital transformation because they're putting technology in front of customers. Well, retail, is being Amazoned, so enormous disruption, and so everybody. Well, Amazon obviously is all over this stuff, but everybody else has to figure out how to compete with Amazon, and low-code, no-code is essential for that. Banking is changing dramatically globally. There's global changes to the banking industry. So the list goes on and on. There's really no single industry to call out, and really none are left out either. They're all doing it.
All right.
Yeah.
How can we empower people in our organization to use these no-code, low-code tools?
How can you empower them? Well, it's just really sort of organization specific. But one of the key advantages, and this is something that the Kintone really stands out as well, is just the ease of use. And I sort of think of this ease of use question as the Excel threshold, right? So Microsoft Excel. How many people here use Microsoft Excel? Well, just about everybody. And that's sort of the point. Right? Excel is an enormously powerful tool that 90% of any large organization, 90% of the people will use. Well, that's sort of the threshold. If it's as easy as Excel or easier, then you can go to anybody who's okay with Excel and say, well, this is easier than Excel. And they'll say, oh, okay, I can do that. So is Kintone easier to use than Excel? Well, yeah. I mean, Excel is a bear if you think about it. It's amazing we figured it out as it is. But if it's harder than Excel, well, that's really hard. So that's sort of that threshold. And if a business user is comfortable with Excel or similar tools, obviously it doesn't have to be that one tool, but at that level, then all these low-code, no-code, well, not all of them, but some of the better no-code players like Kintone are in that easier than Excel category. And if you position it that way, then really anybody is comfortable figuring it out if they have a reason to, right? If they have a need, right? There's no point in trying to convince somebody who wouldn't build anything anyway, right? So if somebody has a need, it's like, wait a minute, you can do this yourself. And it's like, well, okay, it's easier than Excel. Well, okay then.
Our last question that we just received, what do you think these no-code, low-code technologies will look like in 10 years?
Well, 10 years is a long time in this business. So what we're seeing with a lot of these products is that there's a lot of these no-code, low-code products, and we get pitches all the time. So there's new ones cropping up all over the world all the time. And generally, they only do certain things really well. So some are better at process stuff, and some are better at the mobile stuff. Some are better at the user interface, and some are better at integration. Well, what's happening is they're all getting better at all the other things, right? So the ones that don't do everything well are going to sort of fall out of the market. So what you'll end up with in 10 years are the survivors who all do everything well. And that's sort of where this is going.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Very enlightening presentation.
Thank you.